The Galactic Confederation had always viewed humans with cautious suspicion. They called Earth a Deathworld, a planet with crushing gravity, deadly radiation levels, aggressive predators, and poisonous oxygen concentrations. When they reluctantly admitted Earth to their ranks a century ago, most species maintained a safe distance from these unpredictable newcomers. Ambassador Alina Reyes suppressed a sigh as she took her seat in the far corner of the Confederation Assembly Chamber. After 3 years representing humanity in this gleaming hall of polished stone and floating light displays, she had grown accustomed to the subtle ways other representatives avoided her. The slight shift away when she entered elevator pods, the empty seats that always surrounded her delegation, the hushed conversations that halted when humans approached. Today, however, no one paid her any attention. All eyes focused on the central holographic display, where a 3-dimensional image of the Alexian home system rotated slowly. Red markers blinked across the projection, indicating destroyed outposts and settlements. The attack began 26 standard hours ago, the Zolaxian moderator announced, their metallic voice echoing through the chamber. The Vex swarm entered the system through the outer asteroid belt and immediately disabled communication relays. Alina leaned forward, studying the tactical display with trained eyes. The Alexians were peaceful researchers and artists, their crystalline cities famous throughout the sector. They had no standing military, relying on Confederation protection protocols. Protocols that, judging by the chamber's atmosphere of academic discussion, rather than urgent action, were moving with typical bureaucratic caution. Initial projections suggest the Alexian homeworld will be completely overwhelmed within 72 hours, the Zolaxian continued. The Council recommends forming an assessment committee to evaluate potential response options. A committee. Alina's fingers tightened around her datapad. While a committee deliberated, millions would die. The Kaltaran representative rose, 6 spindly limbs gesturing in formal patterns. We must consider the resource implications of intervention. The Vec have consumed 17 worlds in the past decade. Perhaps containment rather than confrontation represents the optimal approach. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Alina glanced at the election representative, a slender figure whose translucent skin had paled to an ashen gray. The representative's 3 primary eyes blinked rapidly in what Alina had learned was an expression of profound distress. My people are dying, the election said, voice barely audible above the chamber's ambient hum. Our youngest colony on Keeler 9 has already gone silent. Over 30,000 souls, gone. Regrettable losses, the Dravity Counselor acknowledged with a perfunctory bow. However, we must assess whether the Vec can be reasoned with. Perhaps offering outlying territories would satisfy their expansion needs temporarily. Alina had heard enough. While the chamber debated acceptable casualty thresholds, actual casualties mounted. She activated her datapad, bypassing the Confederation's diplomatic channels for a direct link to Earth Central Command. Her message was brief. Alexian civilization under attack by Vex swarm. Confederation debating response. Estimated survival window, 72 hours. Genocide in progress. Request immediate intervention under Protocol Omega. She added her authentication code and transmitted. Earth Central would understand the implications. Protocol Omega had been established after humanity joined the Confederation and realized how reluctant the galactic community was to take direct action during crisis. It authorized unilateral human response to extinction-level events, regardless of Confederation approval. 3 days later, as the Assembly still argued over proper procedure, emergency alarms blared throughout the station. The massive view screen shifted to show real-time images from the Alexian system's edge, where space itself seemed to tear open in dozens of locations. The Zolaxian moderator froze mid-sentence. Unscheduled transit events detected. Multiple vessels entering the system. Alina felt a surge of fierce pride as the first ships emerged from hyperspace. The distinctive silhouettes of Earth's Second Fleet, battleships with names drawn from humanity's most desperate last stands. Thermopylae, Alamo, Masada. Their hulls glowed red-hot from pushing engines beyond safety specifications to reach the elections in time. The election representative stared at the tactical display in shock. Who authorized this response? Ambassador Reyes allowed herself a small smile as more ships continued to appear. We did. For the first time since joining the Confederation, Elena saw something new in the eyes of the other representatives as they turned toward her. Not fear of humanity's violence, but astonishment at humanity's resolve. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they had come to save, not conquer. Admiral Jana Novak stood motionless on the bridge of the UES Normandy, her weathered face illuminated by the holographic tactical displays that surrounded her command station. Decades of military service had etched fine lines around her eyes, but those eyes remained sharp as they assessed the unfolding situation with methodical precision. VEC vessels are altering course to intercept, Admiral, her tactical officer reported. Their fleet outnumbers us approximately 6-1. Jana nodded once, her short silver hair catching the blue light of the displays. Formation status. The Thermopylae battle group has achieved position. Hiroshima and Potemkin are maintaining stealth protocols behind the fourth moon. Evacuation vessels report they're at 30% capacity with election civilians. Behind her, a small delegation of rescued election officials watched the human crew with a mixture of hope and barely concealed terror. The tallest among them, an elder whose crystalline skin had dulled with age, stepped forward hesitantly. Your ships are significantly outnumbered, Admiral, the election coordinator whispered, voice melodic despite the translator. The Confederation calculated a 97% casualty rate for direct engagement with a VEC force of this magnitude. Jana turned, meeting the alien's three iridescent eyes. Throughout human history, our greatest victories came when the odds seemed impossible. She gestured toward the main view screen, where the approaching VEC vessels moved in perfect, mathematically precise formations. They rely on predictability and overwhelming numbers. We don't. She tapped her command console. All vessels, execute Operation Valkyrie. The Normandy vibrated subtly as launch bays opened along its armored flanks. Across the human fleet, hundreds of smaller craft emerged, fighters and tactical insertion vessels piloted by individuals who moved with the unpredictable intuition of natural predators rather than programmed logic. The VEC collective consciousness registered confusion. In thousands of years of conquest, it had cataloged and analyzed 17 distinct species, developing perfect counter-strategies for each, but it had never encountered humans before. The distributed intelligence of the swarm observed as the smaller human vessels deliberately broke formation, each following seemingly random vectors instead of coordinated patterns. The hive mind adjusted its calculations, attempting to predict movement patterns. It found none. Where other species followed logical defensive postures, these Deathworlders appeared to be acting independently, without centralized control. Impossible. Inefficient. Incomprehensible. Across the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Raj Patel monitored communications. No response to our transmissions, Admiral. The VEC aren't acknowledging our warning. Jana hadn't expected them to. Intelligence suggested the VEC communicated primarily through pheromones and neural links, with verbal language used only for interacting with conquerable species. She straightened her uniform jacket and nodded to her communications officer. Broadcast on all frequencies, all languages in the database. Message as follows. This is Admiral Jana Novak of the United Earth Fleet. We stand with the election people. You will withdraw from this system immediately or face the consequences of your aggression. On the main view screen, the VEC vessels continued their approach, unresponsive to the ultimatum. They're accelerating, Admiral, her tactical officer reported. Weapons signatures detected. They're powering up. Jana's expression remained calm as she studied the holographic representation of the battle space. As expected, they've never encountered a species that didn't retreat before their numerical advantage. She allowed herself a small, cold smile. Time they learned some history. On Earth, we have a saying, quantity has a quality all its own. But so does ferocity. She tapped her command console again. All vessels, weapons-free. Fighters, initiate chaos protocols. Main battle group, execute Thermopylae maneuver. The Alexian elder watched in astonishment as the human vessels suddenly accelerated toward the heart of the Vec fleet rather than establishing a defensive perimeter. You're attacking them directly. But their numbers. We're not just attacking, Jana explained, her eyes never leaving the tactical display as the first exchanges of weapons fire illuminated space. We're teaching them something they've never learned in all their conquests. What lesson could possibly overcome such odds? The Alexian asked. Admiral Novik's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of humanity's long history of conflict and survival. That some species fight hardest when victory seems impossible, and we've had a lot of practice at impossible. Across the void, the Vec Collective experienced something unfamiliar as the human vessels closed to engagement range. For the first time in its collective memory, the hive mind encountered a response it could not categorize. The Deathworlders weren't retreating. They weren't negotiating. And they weren't following any battle doctrine the Vec had ever encountered. For the first time, the Vec experienced doubt. Commander Tariq Ahmadi braced himself as another impact rocked the UES Thermopylae. The bridge lighting flickered momentarily as backup systems engaged, casting strange shadows across the faces of his crew. They'd been engaged with the Vec for nearly 6 hours, and the strain showed in everyone's eyes. Hull breach on decks 3 through 7. Lieutenant Yumi Tanaka reported from the tactical station. Her voice remained steady despite the rivulet of blood trickling from a cut above her eye. Engineering reports reactor containment at 68% and falling. Sir, we can't take another hit like that. Tariq wiped sweat and blood from his forehead, dark eyes never leaving the holographic battle display. The Thermopylae had taken significant damage, but they had achieved their primary objective, drawing the attention of the Vec flagship and 3 support vessels. Seal off the affected sections, he ordered. Redirect power from non-essential systems to forward shields. He tapped his command console, bringing up the fleet-wide tactical overlay. We're right where we need to be, Lieutenant. The Vec flagship has committed to our position. A predatory smile crossed his face as he watched the massive Vec command vessel adjust its course to pursue his wounded ship. Signal the Hiroshima and Potemkin. Spring the trap. The Vec collective consciousness processed battle data with perfect mathematical precision. It had analyzed the damage sustained by the human vessel designated Thermopylae and calculated a 93% probability of imminent reactor containment failure. The logical response was to eliminate this damage threat and redistribute forces to more functional targets. What the hive mind couldn't calculate was why the human commander had maneuvered his damaged vessel into a position that exposed its vulnerabilities rather than retreating to the protection of its fleet. The behavior contradicted all known combat doctrines. It was inefficient, illogical. On the far side of the Alexian moon, 2 human vessels that had remained in stealth mode suddenly powered up their drive systems. The UES Hiroshima and UES Potemkin accelerated toward the exposed flank of the Vec command ship, weapon systems coming online as they emerged from the moon's sensor shadow. The hive mind registered the new threat too late. Its attention focused on the wounded human vessel that had seemingly made a critical tactical error. By the time it attempted to reorient its defensive systems, the human ambush vessels had closed to optimal firing range. Target locked, Weapons Officer Chen reported on the Hiroshima's bridge. Their shields are concentrated forward to engage the Thermopylae. Captain Abigail Morgan nodded sharply. Fire everything. Multiple weapon systems discharged simultaneously. Kinetic penetrators designed to breach the organic hull of the Vec vessel, followed by targeted electromagnetic pulses calibrated to disrupt the neural communication networks that link the hive mind throughout the ship. Aboard the Thermopylae, Commander Ahmadi watched as the Vec flagship's pursuit faltered. Its perfectly coordinated movements became erratic as sections of the vast vessel lost connection with the central consciousness. They're confused, Tariq observed. The hive mind is trying to reestablish control. He turned to his communications officer. Signal all fighter wings. Execute Phase 2. Across the battlefield, human fighter craft that had been engaging in seemingly chaotic evasive patterns suddenly converged on the disoriented Vec flagship. They targeted specific points along the organic hull, nodes that intelligence suggested housed secondary neural clusters. The Vec had conquered through overwhelming numbers and perfect coordination. Never before had they faced an enemy that deliberately used their own injuries as bait, that sacrificed optimal positioning for strategic advantage, that employed unpredictability itself as a weapon. The Vec are pulling back, Lieutenant Tanaka reported, surprise evident in her voice. Their formation is breaking apart. Tariq nodded, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction as the massive Vec vessels began to retreat from his wounded ship. Humans learn warfare fighting other humans, Lieutenant. Our entire history taught us to expect the unexpected. He watched as the Vec fleet attempted to reconsolidate its formation. They've never had to adapt to an enemy that thinks like we do. Across the system, similar scenarios unfolded as human vessels employed tactics no algorithm could predict, sacrificing advantages, taking calculated risks, and turning apparent weaknesses into strengths. The Vec Collective, for the first time in its expansion, found itself unable to calculate optimal responses. Humans, the Vec were learning with mounting concern, turned their own injuries into weapons. And that made them unlike any species they had encountered before. Major Sophia Chen pressed her back against the crystalline wall, listening to the chittering sounds of Vec drones echoing through the ruins of what had once been the Alexian capital's cultural district. Her helmet display showed the positions of her Marine squad, each member strategically positioned throughout the shattered remains of the building. "They're adapting to our tactics," she murmured into her comm system. Third wave moved differently than the second. "They're learning." Through her visor, she observed a group of 7 Vec drones moving through the plaza below. Unlike the perfect formation of their earlier assaults, these moved with greater spacing between units, clearly attempting to minimize casualties from the explosive traps that had decimated their previous waves. Sophia tapped a command into her wrist console, switching to the squad frequency. "All units, implement randomization protocols. Keep them guessing." Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Jackson, acknowledged from his position across the plaza. "Copy that. What's the pattern this time, Major?" "No pattern," she replied, checking her weapons charge. "That's the point. Everyone choose your own approach. Maximum chaos." Decades of Confederation intelligence had documented the Vec's perfect coordination, their ability to counter any consistent strategy. What no one had considered was how they would respond to complete unpredictability, to soldiers who deliberately avoided patterns. Sophia waited until the drone patrol reached the center of the plaza before giving the signal. Now, what followed wasn't the synchronized assault that conventional military doctrine would dictate. Instead, each human Marine acted independently. Some fired from cover. Others charged positions no tactical computer would have selected. 2 used grappling systems to descend from higher levels, attacking from above, while making themselves temporarily vulnerable. The results were immediate. The Vec drones, accustomed to countering organized attacks, struggled to prioritize threats coming from multiple directions with no discernible pattern. Their response, while still coordinated, showed split-second hesitations, fatal delays against human reaction times. 80 seconds later, the plaza fell silent again. Sophia emerged from cover, checking the area through her helmet's enhanced vision modes. All 7 drones lay motionless on the crystalline pavement. "Area secured," she confirmed. "Michaels, Carter, check those buildings for survivors. Rest of you, reposition and prepare for the next wave. They'll send more now." "Always do," Jackson commented, reloading his weapon as he approached. "But did you notice? They're getting slower to respond, like the hive mind is stretched thin trying to process too many variables." Sophia nodded. Human unpredictability was proving to be an advantage the Vec couldn't counter through numbers alone. 3 kilometers beneath the city's surface, Dr. Marcus Rivera worked in a converted maintenance chamber that now served as the main human medical facility. The crystalline walls had been draped with sterilization fields, creating a surprisingly effective emergency hospital. Marcus hadn't slept in nearly 40 hours. Dark circles shadowed his eyes as he finished a delicate procedure on an Alexian child whose left limbs had been damaged in an earlier VEC assault. Around him, a group of Alexian medical practitioners watched with undisguised fascination. The cardiovascular system has fascinating parallels to amphibians on Earth, he explained as his hands worked with practiced precision. We've adapted our emergency protocols to account for the differences in fluid pressure and cellular regeneration. He completed the final neural connection and stepped back, monitoring the readouts on his portable diagnostic equipment. She'll recover full function within 2 days. Your species' cellular regeneration rate is remarkable when properly directed. An elder Alexian healer tilted her head in confusion. How do you know so much about trauma medicine? Your Confederation records indicated your species was primarily focused on offensive capabilities. Marcus cleaned his instruments methodically as he responded. On a death world, anything that doesn't kill you immediately becomes a learning opportunity. Humans spent millennia learning how to put each other back together after taking each other apart. He smiled tiredly. Turns out those skills are universally applicable. The healer's 3 eyes blinked in the Alexian expression of revelation. You evolved medicine alongside violence. Precisely, Marcus replied, already turning to the next patient. We had to. On Earth, if you can't adapt, you don't survive. Above them, the sounds of distant combat periodically echoed through the crystalline structures. The VEC continued their relentless assault on the surface, but for the first time since their arrival in the system, they were no longer advancing. The Deathworlders had drawn their line, and a hive mind was learning just how costly it could be to cross it. 4 weeks into the conflict, the massive Confederation diplomatic vessel Harmonious Discourse emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Alexian system. Its ornate design, all sweeping curves and ceremonial illumination, stood in stark contrast to the battle-scarred human ships that maintained their defensive positions around the Alexian homeworld. Admiral Jenna Novik received the Confederation representatives in the Normandy's conference room. The space had been hastily converted from a secondary tactical center, and holographic displays still showed real-time battle data from ongoing operations. Medical patches covered burns along her left arm, and exhaustion had etched new lines around her eyes after weeks of continuous combat operations. Your intervention was not sanctioned, stated the Sindari representative, a tall arthropoid whose compound eyes reflected the room's lighting in prismatic patterns. The Confederation Council did not authorize this level of military engagement. We didn't ask permission, Novik replied evenly. She gestured toward a display showing civilian evacuation statistics. The Alexians requested assistance. That was sufficient. The Zalaxian diplomat, metallic scales gleaming under the lights, tapped a sequence into a ceremonial data tablet. Our preliminary assessment indicates the VEC swarm has suffered unprecedented casualties. Nearly 30% of their forces have been neutralized. This represents a significant disruption to the balance of power in the sector. That was the idea, Novik responded, her voice betraying a hint of impatience. They were committing genocide. Balance of power wasn't our primary concern. Nevertheless, the Xindari continued, mandibles clicking in what humans had learned was a sign of disapproval. The Confederation must insist on assuming control of this situation immediately. A negotiated settlement. Admiral Novik straightened, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. With respect, Ambassador, there will be no negotiation with the VEC while they occupy Alexian territory. Our terms are simple. They leave, or we continue removing them. The Confederation representatives exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for such directness. The third delegate, a Dravidi whose translucent body pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, floated forward. Admiral, surely you recognize the resource limitations of your position. Your fleet, while impressively resilient, cannot sustain this level of conflict indefinitely. Novek's expression remained impassive. We don't need to fight indefinitely, just effectively. On her secure command tablet, a notification flashed. She allowed herself a small smile as she read the encrypted message from Captain Defiant Williams of the UES Shackleton, the vessel presumed destroyed in an early engagement, but actually operating deep behind VEC lines on a critical mission. Operation Sundering is proceeding as planned. The message read, Neural Nexus located. Commencing final approach. Meanwhile, deep within VEC territory, the UES Shackleton maintained minimal power as it drifted among the organic debris surrounding the massive VEC mothership. The vessel's experimental stealth systems had allowed it to penetrate the heart of the VEC fleet undetected, mimicking the biological signatures of VEC support organisms. Captain Defiant Williams led his specialized team through the mothership's organic corridors, their adaptive camouflage blending with the pulsating tissues that formed the vessel's interior. Decades of Confederation observation had never yielded this level of access to VEC biology. The hive mind had always destroyed its ships rather than allow them to be captured and studied. We're approaching the central nexus, whispered Dr. Amara Okafor, the team's neural specialist. She checked readings on her specialized equipment, designed to detect the psychic emanations that linked the VEC collective. The hive mind concentration is strongest through that passage. Defiant nodded, his expression resolute beneath his adaptive mask. Remember your training, people. Once we establish connection, they'll experience the full spectrum of human consciousness. It won't be pleasant for either side. His team carried the most classified technology humanity had developed since joining the Confederation, a neural disruptor designed to fragment the VEC hive mind by introducing the concept of individuality into their collective consciousness. No other species would have attempted such a direct psychic confrontation with the VEC. No other species had evolved with Earth's unique combination of individual competition and social cooperation. Ready for deployment, his engineer reported, securing the device to what appeared to be a neural cluster in the chamber wall. Defiant checked the mission timer. Across the system, human forces were initiating coordinated strikes to distract the VEC consciousness, dividing its attention to create this narrow window of opportunity. Commence Operation Sundering, he ordered quietly. Let's show them what it means to think for themselves. As Dr. Okafor activated the device, none of them could predict exactly how the VEC would respond to their first taste of human individuality. They were about to fundamentally change an entire species, but evolution had taught humanity that sometimes survival required radical adaptation. Dr. Amara Okafor had spent her career studying xenopsychology, the mental structures of non-human intelligences. She had mapped the unified purpose of Zolaxian hive clusters and decoded the layered consciousness of Dravidi flotation colonies, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for direct neural contact with the VEC collective. As the interface activated, Amara gasped. Her specialized neural implants connected with the vast network surrounding them, and her consciousness expanded into an ocean of perfect uniformity. Millions of identical thoughts moved in perfect synchronization, each drone a mere extension of the central intelligence that guided the entire species. Their minds had no variation. She whispered, her voice strained as her team monitored her vital signs. Millions of copies with identical thought patterns, no individual perspectives or experiences. She steadied herself against the console as the alien consciousness pressed against her mind. No wonder they can't adapt to the unexpected. They've never needed to think differently from one another. Captain Williams watched the neural activity monitors with growing concern. Are you all right, Doctor? We can abort if... No, Amara interrupted, her eyes closed in concentration. The connection is stable. I'm containing it. Sweat beaded on her dark skin as she processed the alien intelligence. They're curious. They've never encountered anything like human consciousness before. So many contradicting thoughts and emotions in a single mind. Across the neural link, the Vec Collective experienced something unprecedented in its existence, the chaotic storm of human emotion and thought. Where its consciousness flowed in a single unified stream, the human mind swirled with contradictions, love and hate, fear and courage, selfishness and sacrifice, all coexisting within the same intelligence. A hive mind recoiled in confusion, attempting to categorize and organize this chaos into understandable patterns. It failed. Human consciousness defied its organizational structure, each thought triggering cascading reactions that generated still more complexity. "They're struggling to process our mental structure," Amara reported, her breathing becoming more controlled as she adjusted to the connection. Beginning upload sequence. Engineer Rivera initiated the program they had designated Sundering, a carefully designed package of human neural patterns emphasizing individual experience, personal choice, and the value of diversity. Concepts fundamentally alien to the Vec, but essential to human evolution on their dangerous homeworld. Upload at 20%, Rivera reported, monitoring the data flow. The collective is attempting to quarantine the affected nodes. Amara's expression tightened. They can't. Our patterns are too infectious. They've never had to defend against ideological contamination before. Throughout Vec space, the perfect unity of their consciousness began to fragment. Individual drones paused mid-action as new thought patterns disrupted their connection to the collective. Combat units hesitated, their perfectly coordinated attacks faltering. On the bridge of the Normandy, Admiral Novak watched as tactical displays showed Vec formations breaking apart across the system. "What's happening?" her executive officer asked, bewildered by the sudden disorganization of the enemy fleet. "Operation Sundering," Novak replied quietly. "Captain Williams' team is introducing the Vec to a concept they've never encountered: individuality." In the neural nexus, Amara's eyes snapped open. "Something unexpected is happening," she announced, her voice tight with concentration. "The collective isn't just fragmenting, it's evolving." The team watched in astonishment as the neural activity monitors showed new patterns forming throughout the Vec network, unique variations that had never existed before. Drones that had operated as perfect copies for millennia were developing distinct neural signatures. "Upload complete," Rivera confirmed. Captain Williams studied the readings with cautious optimism. "What exactly are we seeing, Doctor?" Amara disconnected from the interface, her hands trembling slightly from the mental exertion. "The beginning of individual consciousness within the collective. We didn't just disrupt their unity. We've triggered the emergence of separate identities." Her expression was a mixture of awe and concern. "We've fundamentally altered their species in ways we couldn't have predicted." Throughout Vec space, confused drones experienced something entirely new: personal perspective. After countless generations of perfect uniformity, individual Vec began to process information differently from their neighbors. Some reacted with terror at this sundering of their shared identity. Others experienced a strange new sensation: curiosity about their own potential. The collective consciousness, faced with this unprecedented internal diversity, did the only thing it could to preserve itself. It ordered a full retreat to core Vec systems to process this evolutionary crisis. In the neural chamber, Captain Williams watched as the organic walls around them pulsed with new patterns. "We should evacuate immediately," he ordered. "The mothership is changing." He glanced at Amara, who was still processing what they had witnessed. "Did we just win or commit an act of warfare on a scale we've never attempted before?" "Both," she replied softly. "We just changed the course of an entire species' evolution." Her dark eyes met his, exactly as Earth changed ours. 2 weeks after Operation Sundering, the crystalline spires of the Alexian capital glittered in the morning sunlight. The destruction remained evident. Shattered structures and impact craters scared the once pristine cityscape. But amid the ruins, something unexpected had emerged: cooperation. Elena Reyes stood on a viewing platform overlooking the central plaza, watching human engineers working alongside Alexian builders. The humans had brought practical knowledge of defensive architecture, teaching the elections how to incorporate resilient design principles into their traditionally delicate crystal structures. We never considered reinforcing the harmonic nodes, the Alexian city planner explained, gesturing toward a partially reconstructed tower. Our buildings were designed for aesthetic resonance, not to withstand concentrated energy weapons. On Earth, we learned the hard way that beauty and strength aren't mutually exclusive, Alina replied. Some of our most enduring structures survived centuries of conflict, specifically because they were built to last. The Alexian's translucent skin shifted to a shade that Alina had learned indicated thoughtful consideration. Your species builds with permanence in mind. Even knowing destruction might come. Especially knowing it might come, she corrected gently. Acknowledging vulnerability doesn't mean accepting defeat. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a Confederation diplomatic shuttle descending toward the newly reconstructed landing platform. Alina straightened her uniform jacket, preparing for what promised to be a challenging meeting. In the Confederation Assembly's emergency session, debate about humanity's unauthorized intervention had grown increasingly heated over the past weeks. The sudden retreat of the Vex swarm, not just from Alexian space, but from all their recent conquests, had sent shockwaves through galactic politics. They violated 23 established protocols. The Xindari delegation protested, mandibles clicking in agitation as holographic displays showed human military vessels still positioned throughout the Alexian system. Their fleet mobilized without approval, deployed restricted technologies, and engaged in direct combat without pursuing diplomatic channels. The Dravidi representative pulsed with concerned bioluminescence. Most concerning is their deployment of neural interface technology against the Vec collective. Early reports suggest they fundamentally altered Vec neurological patterns. The long-term implications remain unknown. The Zalaxian moderator turned toward the human section, where a junior diplomat maintained Earth's presence in Ambassador Reyes' absence. The Assembly demands an explanation for these actions, which represent unprecedented interference in interspecies affairs. Back on the Alexian homeworld, Alina greeted the Confederation representatives with formal courtesy as they disembarked from their shuttle. Their expressions ranged from visible disapproval to barely concealed curiosity. Ambassador Reyes, the Xindari delegate, acknowledged stiffly. The Confederation Oversight Committee has arrived to assess the situation and determine appropriate sanctions for Earth's unilateral military action. Alina nodded politely. Of course. Allow me to show you exactly what that action has accomplished. She gestured toward the waiting transport. We'll begin with the medical facilities, where human doctors are treating the injured, then proceed to the residential districts, where our engineers have restored critical infrastructure. The Dravidi representative drifted forward, translucent body pulsing with skepticism. Ambassador, you must understand that good intentions do not excuse protocol violations. The Confederation exists to prevent precisely this kind of uncoordinated intervention. Alina's diplomatic smile never wavered. With respect, honored representative, the Confederation exists to protect its member species. When that protection failed to materialize, we acted according to our conscience. As their transport moved through the recovering city, even the most critical representatives fell silent at the sight of human and Alexian cooperation. Marine squads had transitioned from combat operations to training Alexian defense forces. Medical teams worked tirelessly in field hospitals. Engineers rebuilt power systems and communication networks. On the Normandy, Admiral Novik received the encrypted message from Earth Command with stoic resignation. The Confederation had voted to impose sanctions on human worlds for their reckless intervention and deployment of prohibited technologies. Was it worth it? Her executive officer asked quietly. Novik set down the communication device and gazed through the viewport at the Alexian homeworld, still damaged but no longer in danger of extinction. She watched as Alexian children played in a newly secured park that weeks ago had been a battlefield. Always, she answered simply. Then with the pragmatism that had defined her career. Besides, sanctions are temporary. Extinction is permanent. In the assembly chamber, Ambassador Reyes finally rose to address the gathered representatives after hours of criticism. The room fell silent as she stepped to the central podium. "When Earth joined your confederation," she said calmly, "you labeled us dangerous, unpredictable. You feared our capacity for violence." She looked around the silent chamber. "What you fail to understand is that this same capacity drives us to protect others. You calculated acceptable losses. We saw people who needed immediate help." 6 months after the election crisis, the Grand Assembly Hall of the United Earth Government buzzed with anticipation. Delegates from every human colony filled the tiered seating, their conversations creating a gentle murmur that echoed through the vaulted chamber. At the center of attention stood an unexpected figure, the Election High Representative, whose crystalline form caught the light in iridescent patterns. For generations, the election began, translator rendering the melodic language into crisp English. "We were taught to fear Deathworlders. The Confederation's historical records painted your species as volatile, unpredictable, evolved from predators, and therefore inherently dangerous." The representative's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, an expression of profound respect. "We never considered that creatures evolved in constant danger would understand the value of protection better than those who never faced extinction." Admiral Jana Novak washed from her position among the Earth military leadership, her dress uniform adorned with a new commendation created specifically to honor those who had served in the election defense campaign. The sanctions imposed by the Confederation had proven largely symbolic. Earth's economy had already begun shifting toward direct trade agreements with species who admired their decisive action. Today, the election continued. "I am authorized to present our proposal for the Mutual Defense Initiative, an alliance between our peoples outside the Confederation framework." The announcement sent ripples of surprise through the assembly. Such bilateral agreements existed between Confederation members, but were typically discouraged in favor of collective security policies. For the elections to propose this represented a significant diplomatic realignment. Meanwhile, in remote regions of Vec space, an unprecedented phenomenon continued to unfold. The collective consciousness that had guided their species for millennia now contained something new: diversity of thought. Individual Vec had begun to emerge with distinct perspectives, unique approaches to problems, and most revolutionary, the capacity to question directives from the Central Intelligence. Dr. Amara Okafor reviewed the latest data from long-range observation posts, her office at the Xenopsychology Institute filled with holographic representations of evolving Vec neural patterns. They're developing specialized social roles beyond simple worker hierarchies, she noted to her research team. The neural divergence is accelerating. We're seeing the equivalent of cultural formation within their previously homogeneous civilization. Her colleague, Dr. Chen, studied one particular neural map with fascination. This one shows patterns remarkably similar to creative problem-solving in individualistic species. They're innovating. Evolution finding a way, Amara replied softly. We didn't destroy them. We diversified them. 3 days later, Admiral Novak stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned Normandy II, watching as election crew members worked seamlessly alongside human officers. What had begun as a training exchange had evolved into full integration, with elections eager to learn humanity's approach to defense and emergency response. They adapt quickly, her executive officer noted, observing an Alexian tactical specialist, masterfully operating a weapons targeting system that would have been forbidden under Confederation restrictions. They always had the potential, Novak replied. They just needed someone to show them it was worth fighting for. She studied the tactical display showing former Confederation worlds now seeking defensive partnerships with Earth. The galaxy doesn't always need peacekeepers. Sometimes it needs protectors. Intelligence reports indicated that several predatory civilizations had observed this new alliance with growing concern. The Deathworlders had been effectively contained for generations through isolation and diplomatic restrictions. Now they were forming direct partnerships throughout the sector, sharing their military technologies and defensive strategies with species that had always relied on the Confederation's cautious approach to security. In the diplomatic wing of Earth's governmental complex, Ambassador Elena Reyes welcomed representatives from 12 formerly neutral species. Their request for a conference on alternative security arrangements represented a fundamental shift in galactic politics. "We've studied your response to the election crisis," the Kaltaran delegate stated, 6 limbs performing a gesture of respect. "Your species acts when others merely deliberate. Several worlds in our sector face similar threats but receive only promises of assessment committees from the Confederation." Elena nodded in understanding. "Earth believes in more direct solutions. Precisely why we've come," the delegate confirmed. "We seek an alliance with those who understand that security sometimes requires immediate action rather than perfect consensus." Across the void of space, other civilizations watched as humanity's influence expanded, not through conquest or coercion, but through a simple principle that resonated with vulnerable species. When called for help, they actually came. The galaxy was changing, and at its center were the humans who had answered a desperate distress signal, showing the stars that being evolved from predators didn't make them monsters. It made them exactly the allies you wanted when darkness threatened everything you loved. The end.